Garrett Sobieski was 41 years old, and he had never once raised his voice at someone he loved. Not when it would have been justified. Not when most people would have understood. Not even when the silence cost him something he could feel in his chest for days afterward. He had built a civil engineering consultancy from a folding table in a rented office above a bakery on Elgin Street in Ottawa, back when the only client was a rural municipality that needed a drainage study nobody else wanted to touch. He coached his 6-year-old daughter's Saturday morning hockey practice at the Minto Arena, standing on the bench in a coat that smelled permanently of cold rubber and Tim Hortons coffee, clapping for every wobbly stride like it was the last minute of a playoff game. He picked her up from school every single afternoon. Not most afternoons, every afternoon. Not for a contract deadline, not for a municipal council meeting, not for anything. He was the kind of man who remembered which cereal his daughter considered acceptable on weekdays versus weekends, and understood that violating this protocol carried consequences no adult logic could negotiate away. The kind of man who fixed things before anyone noticed they were broken, who shoveled the elderly neighbor's walk before dawn without mentioning it. His mother, a retired public health nurse from Sudbury, who had raised 3 boys alone after his father left, used to say, while scrubbing potatoes at the kitchen sink with her sleeves pushed past her elbows, that the men worth keeping are the ones who do the hardest work when nobody is clapping. Garrett had taken that sentence and built an entire life around it. Then, on a Saturday evening in late November, his wife stood up at her own birthday dinner, in front of 23 guests, tapped a wine glass with a butter knife, and announced, with the poised smile of a woman who had rehearsed this moment so many times she no longer questioned how it would end, that she was leaving the marriage. That the house, the consultancy's shared assets, and primary custody of their daughter Lily were, in her words, already being handled by her lawyer. That she hoped everyone would support her in this difficult transition. She had not warned him. She had not asked to speak privately. She had chosen an audience. The way a person chooses an audience when the performance matters more than the person sitting across from them. What Vivian Sobieski did not know, what she could not possibly have calculated, was that Garrett had spent the last 5 months constructing something she had never detected, something methodical, patient, and entirely invisible to her. And by the time she set down that butter knife, the structure was already bearing weight. But this story needs to be told properly. Before we continue, if stories about quiet resilience, real accountability, and people who refuse to let betrayal define them speak to something in you, take a moment and subscribe. This one is going to stay with you. Late November in Ottawa, the kind of evening where the last of the leaves have already surrendered, and the air carries that particular November bite, not yet the deep cold of January, but the honest cold that tells you winter has stopped being polite about its arrival. The sky was low and gray, the way Ottawa skies are for roughly 7 months of the year, and the streetlights along the canal had just come on, throwing long reflections across the wet pavement. Vivianne's birthday dinner was at a rented event space in the Glebe, a neighborhood of old trees and renovated brick houses where people hosted exactly this kind of gathering and expected the wine list to be taken seriously. Garrett had organized most of it himself. The caterer, the playlist, the particular brand of sparkling water Vivianne preferred because she had once read an article about mineral content and had committed to the opinion with a that left no room for discussion. He had ordered the cake from a French patisserie in Gatineau that required a 2-week lead time and a level of specificity about buttercream that he had not previously known existed. Lily had helped him write the card. She had drawn a picture of the family standing in front of their house, each figure identified by a carefully misspelled label. In the drawing, everyone was smiling, including the cat. Garrett arrived early. He set up the chairs. He tested the speaker system. He confirmed the table arrangement and adjusted two place settings that were slightly off-center in a way nobody else would have noticed, and that would have quietly bothered him all evening if he had not fixed them. He stood in the empty room for a moment, straightened his tie, and thought about how much he loved a woman who, he did not yet fully understand, had already decided he was the obstacle between her and the life she actually wanted. The guests arrived in clusters. Friends from university, colleagues from Vivienne's marketing firm, a few neighbors. Garrett's mother drove down from Sudbury for the occasion. She sat near the end of the table, straight-backed and watchful in the way of a woman who raised boys through hard seasons and learned to read a room before anyone in it realized they were being read. Lily sat beside Garrett, her legs swinging beneath a chair she was not quite tall enough for, eating exactly the parts of the dinner she had pre-approved and ignoring the rest with the serene confidence of a person whose standards are non-negotiable. When Vivienne stood and clinked the glass, the room went quiet the way rooms do when someone commands attention and does not leave space for the possibility that they might not receive it. Her speech was smooth, rehearsed without appearing rehearsed, which is its own kind of performance. She thanked the guests. She praised the food. She said something light about turning 39. And then, with a shift in tone that a clinical psychologist would recognize as a controlled reveal, a mechanism designed not to inform but to establish a public narrative before the other party has a chance to construct their own, she announced the separation. The room inhaled and did not immediately exhale. Garrett set down his fork. He looked at his plate for approximately 3 seconds. In behavioral psychology, this is sometimes called a regulatory pause, the brief interval in which a person with high emotional discipline overrides the limbic system's demand for an immediate response and redirects processing toward the prefrontal cortex, where planning lives. He was not surprised. He had known for 5 months. But the public staging of it, the calculated deployment of an audience as a pressure tool, that was new information. He cataloged it, filed it, and looked up at his wife with an expression so steady it unnerved two people sitting close enough to see it clearly. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He said quietly enough that only the nearest guests could hear, "Viv, check the folder in your email, the one marked November 27." Then he turned to Lily, who was looking between her parents with the wide, careful attention of a child who senses tectonic activity beneath a surface the adults are pretending is solid. "Hey, sweetheart, let's go get our coats." He picked her up. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her face pressed into his collar, the way children hold on when they understand something important is happening, even if they cannot name it. He carried her past the silent table, past 23 faces, frozen in the particular posture of people who have just witnessed something they will be discussing in low voices for a very long time, and out through the front door into the cold November air. Behind him, the room remained still. Then it was not still at all. But to understand what was in that email folder, to understand what Garrett had quietly and methodically assembled while his wife was busy choreographing his public humiliation, we need to go back 5 months, to a Wednesday afternoon in late June, a sunlit office on Spark Street, and a phone call that restructured everything. Garrett understood about the life he had been living. The call came from a man named Owen Whitfield. He was 62, semi-retired, a former tax consultant who now spent most of his time restoring a 1974 MG Midget in his garage in Barhaven, and offering unsolicited opinions about municipal zoning to anyone who made the mistake of asking how his week was going. He was also Garrett's accountant. He had handled the consultancy's books for 9 years. He knew the numbers the way a surgeon knows anatomy, not from theory, but from years of hands-on work in the specifics. "Garrett, I need to walk you through something. Are you sitting down?" Owen had never once, in 9 years, asked Garrett to sit down. The issue was a discrepancy in the consultancy's joint operating account. Not a rounding error, not a data entry mistake, a sustained, patterned withdrawal of funds over approximately 2 years, routed through a series of transfers that had been designed to resemble ordinary business expenses, but that did not, upon close examination, correspond to any actual vendor, invoice, or service. The total was significant, not catastrophic, but significant enough that Owen's voice had taken on the flat, careful quality of a man delivering news he wishes he did not have to deliver. Each withdrawal had been authorized by the account's co-signatory, Vivian Sobieski. Garrett sat with that information for the duration of one full breath. Then he thanked Owen, asked him to preserve every record, and ended the call. He did not slam the phone. He did not call Vivian. He did not leave the office. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for what felt like several minutes, but was probably less than one. In trauma psychology, there is a concept called the orienting response, the moment immediately after a significant threat is perceived, when the brain temporarily suspends its narrative framework and attempts to reorient itself within a reality that has just shifted. Garrett's orienting response was unusually controlled. His body went still, but his mind did not scatter. It organized. Because Garrett Sobieski had never been the kind of man who handed the steering wheel to his grief. His mother had told him once, spreading salt on the front steps during an ice storm, while 7-year-old Garrett stood holding the bag, "Panic never fixed a single thing. Not once. Not ever. If you have to fall apart, do it after you have fixed the problem." The following Thursday, he met with Audrey Chen, a family law attorney, whose practice occupied a discreet office on Metcalfe Street, 3 blocks from Parliament Hill, and whose reputation in the Ottawa legal community rested on 2 qualities. She was meticulous, and she was unintimidated by anything. She listened to Garrett's account without interruption. She reviewed Owen's preliminary documentation. She made 3 notes on a legal pad and then looked up. This is not a small matter. If the pattern holds, it establishes financial misconduct during the marriage. That changes the landscape of the entire proceeding. I know. We are going to need complete documentation. Every transaction, every authorization, cross-referenced with dates and account records. Owen is already compiling it. Good. Do not confront her. Do not change your routine. Do not give any indication that you are aware. The moment she perceives a she will begin constructing a counter-narrative, and I need her operating on the assumption that she has time. Garrett nodded. He understood this instinctively. The discipline required was not new to him. It was the same discipline that had built the consultancy from a folding table. The same discipline that got him to hockey practice at 6:45 on Saturday mornings in February when the car took 7 minutes to defrost. Patient, deliberate, and fundamentally oriented around the people he was responsible for. At home, nothing changed. He made dinner on the nights he always made dinner. He read Lily her bedtime story, the full version, every page, even on the nights when she was asleep before the middle, and he kept reading anyway because the ritual mattered more than the audience. He asked Vivian about her day. He laughed at the appropriate moments. He operated within the architecture of an ordinary marriage, with the practiced precision of a man who understood that the architecture was now load-bearing in a way it had not been before. It was holding up the investigation. It needed to hold. Vivian noticed nothing. The second development arrived in late August, a Saturday morning. Garrett was at the kitchen table with Lily, who was conducting an elaborate art project involving glitter glue, construction paper, and a creative vision that tolerated no adult suggestions. His phone buzzed, text message from a number he did not recognize. He opened it. A photograph. Vivian's car in a driveway he did not recognize. Time-stamped Friday, August 22, 11:47 p.m. A second photograph. Same car, same driveway, different date. Below the images, a short message. I thought you should know. I am sorry it has to come from me. P. Garrett stared at the screen for 4 seconds. Lily looked up from her project. Daddy, does this look like a penguin or a volcano? He set the phone face down on the table. That is absolutely a penguin, maybe the best penguin I have ever seen. I think it might be a volcano now. Then it is an excellent volcano. He waited until Lily was absorbed again, picked up his phone, and sent one message to Audrey Chen. We have a second front. Can we meet Monday? The P turned out to be Priya Mukherjee, 33, Vivienne's junior colleague at the marketing firm. She had stumbled onto the affair by accident, overheard a phone call she was not intended to hear, and spent 3 weeks debating with herself before sending those photographs. When Garrett met her at a cafe near Dow's Lake, she was visibly nervous, both hands wrapped around a mug she had not touched. I do not want to be in the middle of this. You are not. You delivered information. That is all I am asking for. She is going to know it was me, not from me. I promise you that. From that meeting forward, Garrett operated on 2 parallel tracks. Owen continued assembling the financial records. Audrey began integrating the affair evidence into the legal file. Every document was organized by date. Every photograph was time-stamped. Every financial transfer was cross-referenced against the timeline of the relationship. The pattern was damning. The withdrawals from the consultancy account had accelerated in a manner that correlated precisely with the timeline of the affair. Funds had moved into an account that, upon further investigation, was held jointly by Vivienne and a man named Curtis Delacroix, who, it emerged, worked in commercial real estate and had a professional LinkedIn profile that used the word visionary without apparent irony. Through all of it, Garrett remained the father Lily needed. School pickups, Saturday hockey, the precise and non-negotiable weekend pancake ritual, which required chocolate chips arranged in the shape of a smiley face because Lily had once requested this and now regarded it as constitutional law. He attended every parent-teacher conference. He built a shelf in her room for her rock collection, which had expanded to a point where structural engineering was no longer a metaphor. On a cold October evening, he was sitting on the edge of her bed after the story, pulling the blanket up around her shoulders the way she liked, tucked tight on the left side and loose on the right because she needed 1 foot free for temperature regulation purposes that she had explained to him in detail, and that he had accepted without question. Daddy? Yeah, sweetheart? Is Mummy sad about something? The question landed in his chest with the specific weight of a question a child has been carrying for longer than she should have had to. He paused. He did not reach for a quick answer. In developmental psychology, the way a parent handles a child's first intuition of family instability is considered one of the most consequential communication moments in early childhood. Garrett understood this not because he had read the literature, but because he understood his daughter. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings, Lil, but the one thing that is never ever complicated is how much I love you. That part is the simplest thing in the world. She considered this with the solemn focus of a child evaluating whether an answer meets her internal standards. Okay, can you leave the hall light on? Always. He kissed her forehead. He walked to the hallway. He leaned against the wall and pressed his palm flat against his chest, just for a moment, the way a person does when something they are carrying becomes briefly, physically heavy. Then he went downstairs, opened his laptop, and reviewed the latest documents Audrey had sent. By mid-November, the legal file was complete. Audrey described it as one of the most thoroughly documented cases she had handled in 14 years of practice. Owen's financial analysis ran to 47 pages. The affair timeline was corroborated by photographs, phone records, and transaction histories that interlocked with a precision that left very little room for alternative interpretation. Garrett had filed for divorce 9 days before Vivienne's birthday. The petition had been registered, the emergency motion for temporary custody had been submitted, and the supporting documentation had been delivered to the court. Audrey was on standby. Owen had prepared a financial summary for the judge. Everything was in position. On the night of the birthday dinner, Garrett dressed Lily in her favorite purple sweater, combed her hair with the same careful attention he brought to every ordinary evening, and drove to the glebe. He knew what was coming. He did not know the exact form it would take, but he had prepared for every version of it. When Vivian stood up and made her announcement, Garrett felt something he had not expected. Not anger, not vindication, a strange, heavy sadness. The particular sadness that belongs to a person who spent 5 months watching the person they loved become someone they could no longer recognize, and who has finally, quietly, accepted that the distance between those two versions is permanent. But sadness, he had learned, is not a reason to be unprepared. Viv, check the folder in your email, the one marked November 27. That is what he said, and then he carried his daughter out the door. What Vivian found in that folder and the one moment in the courtroom that nobody in the room was prepared for is just ahead. The email folder contained everything. A fully filed divorce petition dated 9 days prior. She had been out-filed by more than a week. The financial analysis, 47 pages. Every unauthorized withdrawal documented, dated, and traced to its destination. The affair timeline, photographs included, cross-referenced against the financial transfers to establish a pattern that no reasonable interpretation could explain away. A letter from Audrey Chen indicating that an emergency motion for temporary custody of Lily Sobieski had been filed with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, Family Division, as of 8:15 a.m. that morning, and at the very bottom, a single line, all supporting evidence attached and served to the Respondent's Counsel as of this date. Vivienne read it in the rented event space, standing beside the cake Garrett had ordered for her, surrounded by guests who were already reaching for their coats. Her phone shook in her hand, not a subtle tremor. The sustained, full-arm vibration of a person whose autonomic nervous system has concluded, before the conscious mind has fully processed the information, that the situation is no longer under control. She called Curtis Delacroix twice before midnight. He did not answer. He would not answer the following day either, or the day after that. The psychology of this is well documented. When an affair partner is confronted with the material consequences of the arrangement, the most common response is immediate disengagement. Curtis Delacroix followed the pattern precisely. Her attorney, a man she had retained 4 months earlier with considerable confidence, reviewed the file and delivered a single assessment. He filed first. His documentation is extensive, and your financial activity during the marriage is going to be very difficult to explain. The hearing was scheduled for the second week of December. The Elgin Street Courthouse, 3rd floor, the kind of room with high ceilings and wood paneling that carries sound in a way that makes every spoken word feel permanent. Vivian arrived in a tailored gray coat, expression carefully reconstructed from the wreckage of the birthday dinner into something intended to project composure. It did not entirely succeed. Garrett sat at the petitioner's table beside Audrey Chen. Dark suit, no tie, hands resting flat and relaxed on the table in front of him. He did not look at Vivienne. Justice Margaret Alderman presided, 58 years old, 20 years on the family bench, a reputation built on 2 qualities that every attorney in that building understood without needing to discuss. She did not tolerate wasted time, and she regarded the instrumentalization of children in custody disputes with a particular and well-documented severity. She opened the file. She began to read. Something shifted in her expression approximately 4 pages in. Not a dramatic change. A tightening. The subtle contraction that experienced courtroom observers recognize as the moment a judge encounters something that offends their professional sense of order. Audrey presented the financial evidence first, each transaction documented, each transfer traced, the pattern laid out with the dispassionate clarity of a forensic accounting report, because that is precisely what it was. Then she presented the affair timeline, photographs, dates, and the corroborating financial records that linked the affair directly to the movement of funds from the consultancy account into the joint account held with Curtis Delacroix. Vivian's attorney objected twice. Both objections were noted and overruled. Then Audrey called her witness. Priya Mukherjee came through the side door in a dark blue blazer, hands clasped in front of her. She looked younger than she had at the cafe by Dow's Lake, as though the weight of what she was about to do had pressed something visible into her posture. She took the oath. She sat down. She focused on a point between the bench and the back wall. Audrey approached. Ms. Mukherjee, you are a colleague of the respondent at her marketing firm. Is that correct? Yes. In your own words, what did you witness? Priya's jaw tightened. Then she exhaled and began. She described the phone call she had overheard. She described the conversations in which Vivian had discussed, in Priya's words, the financial arrangement with a specificity that made it clear it was not incidental. And then, near the end, her voice dropped. Not dramatically, just enough that the courtroom went very still. She said, and I remember this clearly because it was the sentence that made me send those photographs. She said that the consultancy was the golden goose, and that the timing had to be right, that once the new municipal contracts closed, the valuation would peak, and that was the window. She called it the window. A pause. She was talking about her daughter's father, about the man who built that company, and she was describing it like a liquidation schedule. The room did not breathe. Justice Alderman set her pen down. She looked at Vivian for a long, unhurried moment, the look of a woman who has spent 2 decades in these rooms, watching people arrive with carefully prepared versions of themselves and leave with something considerably less assembled. Her voice, when she spoke, was level and precise. The evidence before this court establishes a documented pattern of financial misconduct during the marriage, including the unauthorized diversion of shared business funds into accounts held jointly with a third party. The court further notes a sustained timeline of marital infidelity that is directly correlated with the financial misconduct. The respondent's own characterization of the family business as, and I am quoting the witness testimony, a golden goose subject to strategic timing, reflects a calculated approach that this court takes extremely seriously. She paused, particularly when a minor child is involved. The rulings came one at a time. Temporary primary custody of Lily Sobieski granted to Garrett Sobieski, effective immediately. Supervised visitation for Vivian Sobieski, limited to 4 hours per week at a court-approved facility. Spousal support petition denied pending full financial review. An independent forensic audit of all shared accounts ordered, with Vivian's cooperation mandated under penalty of contempt. Each ruling landed in that courtroom like a stone falling into still water. Vivian sat through all of it without moving. Then, as Audrey began gathering her documents and the room shifted into its post-verdict murmur, Vivian stood. She crossed the distance between the tables before her attorney could stop her. Garrett. He was placing a notepad into his bag. He looked up. Her composure was gone. What remained was stripped down, unguarded, raw in a way he had not seen since the first year of their marriage, before the layers had accumulated. I know I have no right to say this. I know that. I just need you to hear that I understand what I did. I understand what I destroyed. Audrey, from beside him, placed a hand lightly on his arm, a quiet, professional reminder. Garrett looked at his wife for 5 full seconds. He did not look angry. He did not look victorious. He looked at her the way you look at a photograph of a house you used to live in, with full recognition, and with a distance that has become, somewhere along the way, permanent. He picked up his bag, gave Audrey a single nod, and walked toward the courtroom doors. Outside, the December air was sharp and clean. The canal was frozen. A few early skaters moved across the ice in the distance, small and unhurried against the gray sky. Garrett drove directly to his mother's house, where Lily had been staying for the day. He knocked. The door opened and Lily came running down the hallway at full speed, arms wide, sock feet sliding on the hardwood. "Daddy!" He dropped to one knee and caught her with both arms. He held on. The specific grip of a man who understands with complete clarity what he came close to losing, and who will never, for as long as he lives, take a single ordinary moment of it for granted. He closed his eyes. He breathed. "Hey, sweetheart. Daddy's right here." His mother stood in the hallway behind Lily, arms folded, watching the two of them. She said nothing. She did not need to. The expression on her face, quiet, steady, and carrying the particular relief of a mother who has watched her son walk through the hardest season of his life and come out on the other side still standing, said everything that words would have arrived at too slowly. What happens 6 weeks later, when one final miscalculation closes the door permanently, is something nobody in that courtroom anticipated. 6 weeks is not a long time, but it is long enough for a great deal to shift. Long enough for the first real snowfall to settle in and transform a city into something quieter and slower. Long enough for a child's laugh to refill a house that had gone too silent. Long enough for a man who has been holding himself together under sustained pressure to finally, carefully, exhale. Garrett exhaled. He kept the house, not because it was contested, but because Lily's room was there, and the rock collection shelf was there, and the specific patch of backyard where she had once decided a fairy village existed was there. And these things, in the economy of a 6-year-old's world, constituted non-negotiable infrastructure. Life found its rhythm. Mornings meant the school drop-off ritual, which involved a travel mug of coffee that made it onto the roof of the car roughly once a week, discovered at a red light on Bank Street, and retrieved with the resigned gratitude of a man who has accepted this as a permanent feature of his operating system. Evenings meant homework at the kitchen table, which Lily approached with the grave professionalism of someone who understood that coloring within the lines was a matter of personal integrity. Then dinner, then bath, then the bedtime negotiation, which, operated according to a principle Lily had established early and enforced without exception. The correct number of bedtime stories was always one more than whatever had been read. The consultancy continued growing. Steady, patient, the way Garrett built everything that mattered. Then, on a Tuesday morning in mid-January, Vivian made her final mistake. Under the temporary custody arrangement, she had been granted 4 supervised hours with Lily on Saturday afternoons at a court-designated facility. She had attended 3 of the first 5 sessions. On the remaining 2, her attorney had submitted written explanations. On that January Tuesday, she arrived at Lily's school unannounced. No prior authorization, no court approval. Her name flagged in the system, with a standing restriction on unauthorized contact. The school secretary, a woman named Mrs. Ogilvy, 22 years in elementary school administration, and a filing system that governed her professional universe with the quiet, immovable authority of natural law, checked the records, found the flag, politely excused herself, called the emergency contact on file. Garrett answered on the second ring. He was calm. He was composing a message to Audrey before the call ended. She came to the school. "Do not go there yourself. I will have an emergency motion filed within 2 hours. Do not engage directly. I was not planning to." "Good. Check your email in 90 minutes. The resulting hearing was brief. The documentation was complete. The school's incident report, the existing court order, the timeline of events. Justice Alderman reviewed the materials with the expression of a person who had issued a directive and watched it be disregarded. Her rulings were swift. Supervised visitation revoked entirely. Full permanent custody granted to Garrett Sobieski. Vivian formally advised that any future unauthorized contact would be addressed as contempt of court. The matter was closed, the divorce finalized on a Thursday afternoon in late February. Garrett signed the last documents in Audrey's office, a cup of coffee at his elbow. The city stretched out through the window under a clean white sky, the Peace Tower visible in the distance, steady and indifferent, the way landmarks are on days that feel significant only to the people living through them. Audrey shook his hand. "You handled this with more discipline than almost anyone I have represented. I want you to know that." Garrett looked at the window for a moment. "I had someone to protect." That makes it simpler. A few weeks after the finalization, Lily was in the bath, presiding over an elaborate naval engagement between a rubber duck and a plastic whale that had recently been promoted to admiral under circumstances she declined to explain. She looked up at Garrett with the direct, unfiltered clarity that children deploy when they have been holding a question and have decided the holding is finished. "Daddy, why does Mummy not come to the house anymore?" Garrett sat down on the edge of the tub. He did not rush. He let the question settle, the way a careful person lets something find its weight before deciding what to do with it. Sometimes, Lil, grown-ups make choices that change things in ways that cannot be changed back right away. And when that happens, the most important thing is to focus on the people who are right here, right in front of you. Lily considered this. The rubber duck fell off the whale. She retrieved it without breaking eye contact. "You are the person right in front of me." "That is exactly right. And I am not going anywhere." Lily accepted this with the calm finality of a verdict. She pressed the rubber duck into his hand. "Hold Admiral Duck. He is tired from being in charge." Garrett held Admiral Duck. He stayed on the edge of that tub for the rest of bath time, listening to Lily narrate a maritime saga involving a treasure made entirely of cheese, a storm caused by a whale's sneeze, and a small penguin who saved everyone by knowing the right song. He was grateful, quietly, fully, and without reservation, for every single ordinary second of it. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Garrett met a woman named Solange at a community fundraiser for the Rideau Canal restoration project that he had nearly talked himself out of attending. He had been tired that evening, not from lack of sleep, but from the specific exhaustion that follows months of sustained vigilance finally releasing its hold. The body does not immediately know how to move without the weight it has been carrying. He stood in the parking lot for a full 2 minutes before walking in. Something, discipline or habit, or simply the deeply ingrained reflex of showing up, moved him through the door. Solange Beaumont was 31, a speech-language pathologist who worked with children at CHIO, and held strong opinions about which playgrounds in Ottawa were criminally under-maintained and which Tim Hortons locations made their double-doubles with the correct ratio, which she considered a matter of civic importance. She laughed without editing it first. She listened with her full attention, and when she eventually asked about the divorce, she heard the entire answer without stepping in to finish the parts she had not yet reached. She met Lily on a Saturday afternoon at a park near the canal, a casual introduction that had required considerably more planning than it appeared to. Lily studied her with the thorough, unhurried scrutiny that 6-year-olds apply to new people when they sense the stakes may be significant. After approximately 3 minutes of assessment, she asked, without ceremony, whether Solange knew anything about whales. Solange named 4 species, described their migration routes, and mentioned that blue whales have hearts the size of a small car. Lily approved. That was the beginning. Life settles into something real when a person stops trying to force it into a shape it was never meant to hold. The house on the quiet street became a home, the way homes actually become homes, not through renovation or intention, but through accumulation. 100 unremarkable moments stacking up until one Wednesday evening, standing in the kitchen, stirring pasta while Lily explained whale migration patterns to Solange. With the authority of a tenured marine biologist, Garrett looked around and realized the warmth in the room had nothing to do with the stove. Solange brought a fern, then a second fern, then a trailing plant for the kitchen window that Lily named Professor Leafy, and accepted personal responsibility for watering, a responsibility she executed with the irregular commitment of a person whose enthusiasm operated in bursts. And yet the plant somehow thrived as though the inconsistency suited it. It was a full year after that birthday dinner when Garrett saw Vivienne again. A Saturday morning, the big Loblaws on Isabella Street. He was in the cereal aisle with Lily, who was presenting a detailed and well-structured argument for a box featuring a cartoon owl in a lab coat. Garrett was calmly raising questions about sugar content when he heard his name. He looked up. She was thinner, less composed, not in a careless way, but in the way of a person who has stopped maintaining a version of themselves that was always at some level a construction. A few items in her cart. She was alone. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Lily, fully absorbed in the owl situation, had not looked up. Garrett. Her voice was quiet, stripped of everything that had once made it strategic. I know I have no standing here. I am not asking for anything. I need you to know I am sorry. Not because of the courtroom. Not because of what any of it cost me. Because it was wrong. You did not deserve any of it. He looked at her for a moment, steady, unhurried. There had been a time when her face carried a weight that pressed against something unhealed. But that time had passed. Somewhere in the accumulation of bath-time conversations and bedtime stories and early morning school drop-offs and a slowly deepening understanding of what his life actually was and what it could become. Once he stopped waiting for it to become something else, the weight had lifted. I am not carrying anger anymore, Viv. Not because you have earned that, because it does not serve Lily. And Lily is the only thing that matters. She nodded, her jaw tight, the posture of a person working hard to hold together in the cereal aisle of a grocery store at 10:15 on a Saturday morning. Is she okay? She is wonderful. She is doing really well. He glanced down at Lily, who had secured the owl box under both arms and adopted a posture that strongly indicated the nutritional discussion had reached its conclusion. He looked at Vivienne one last time. Take care of yourself, and he meant it. He turned the cart down the next aisle. That night, after dinner, after the bath, after 2 full stories, and the formal ceremony of tucking in 6 stuffed animals, each requiring its own blanket, its own specific position, and a brief individual acknowledgement, Garrett sat on the edge of Lily's bed in the soft glow of the nightlight. Lily was nearly asleep. One small hand rested loosely around 2 of his fingers, the same way it had since the very first time he held that hand in a hospital room 6 years ago, the morning everything in his life rearranged itself around a new and permanent center. He sat in the still room for a while. The house settled around him, the small, familiar sounds of a home at rest. Solane reading in the other room, the creak of the porch under the evening wind, the faint sound of a neighbor's wind chime catching and releasing its rhythm, he whispered. Barely above silence, you are the reason I stayed steady. Every decision, every quiet night at the desk, every moment I chose patience over anger, it was because you were sleeping down the hall and you deserved a father who built something solid enough to stand on. I did not do it because I am strong. I did it because you made the strength worth finding. Lily breathed on, deep and steady, held completely in sleep. Garrett smiled, quiet, full, and entirely his own. The kind of smile that belongs to a man who built his foundation in the dark, piece by careful piece, and is now, at last, living inside what he built.